Good morning, I'm Carrie Waldrep from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm here to present work conducted with Dr. Kristen Burke on delayed fertility in the US context for those with college experience. So we are building on robust literature in the United States on delayed family milestones associated with college loan debt, and including delay in the transition to parenthood. So one of the things we would like to do is expand this to look not only in the transition to parenthood, but in cumulative fertility, and expand as well the concept of these educational characteristics beyond student loan debt, or whether students leave the university with any financial burdens from their university time, but also to consider how long they spend in the university setting and whether they achieve a degree at the time that they leave. Finally, we are curious about the concept of delay, because if we say that students are delaying their fertility, that means that we should see it occur at a later age. And so we want to kind of understand where we can find that. So we want to use fertility intentions to understand if we are really seeing a delay in intentions at earlier ages that we would then see later in the reproductive life course, or if this is intentionally intentionally reduced reproduction. So we will use where we see fertility rates diverge, like so far in the literature, we're seeing a delayed transition to parenthood. So where those with student loan debts have a lower transition to parenthood than those without, for instance. We would see those fertility rates diverge, and then we would apply that to fertility intentions by those different educational groups. And so where the fertility rates are similar, then that tells us that the students intend to have the same number of children. They're just intending to push that to later ages. So we would expect to see them catch up if they're truly delaying. But if the fertility rates diverge and the intentions diverge, then that would suggest to us that they are intending to reduce their fertility. So, all that to say, 3 research questions. 1, to add cumulative fertility to this question. Do we see a pressure on the number of children that students have with these same characteristics? To understand how fertility intentions come into play, and then to look where we see a delayed transition to parenthood, if we see evidence of catching up. So we use the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth 1997 to conduct our analysis, which is a representative cohort study of people born in the US between 1980 and 1984. We restrict the sample to those who have college experience at a normative timeline, so those who begin their college experience within the year of leaving the university setting, and that leaves us a sample of just over 4,000, but the models we will show you today, for reasons we will soon discuss, are going to focus on the more than 2,000 women in the sample. So we have, we have fertility intentions as some of the measures here, and fertility questions, but I just want to walk briefly through the educational characteristics that we're asking about. When we ask about debt, it is simply the binary of whether the students leave with any debt at all or not. That's just the question here. The timing question is on whether they spend 4 years, which is the normative expectation in the US college system, or if they leave sooner, or increasingly we're seeing students take longer than 4 years to leave the university in the United States. So just those 3, and then whether they leave with a degree. We will look at predicted probability of parenthood using logistic regression models, and the cumulative fertility through OLS regression models. And then before we get into the models from those analyses, I just want to walk through the difference in the gender breakdown of these 3 educational characteristics in our sample. Just to, since we'll be focusing on women, I just want to highlight that they are substantially, well, they are similar as we get into it. So we see that roughly half of men and women have debt, roughly a third leave before 4 years, in 4 years, more than 4 years. though the plurality is leaving sooner. And more students leave with a bachelor's degree than don't, but we see that even more for women. Okay, here we are. So in this, this is our predicted probability of parenthood and the intention to be a parenthood that the students indicate in a multivariate model that is incorporating all three of these educational characteristics together. And we see the probability of parenthood at the bottom and the intention to become a parent ever at the top, as reported in their late 20s. So I'm going to ask you to look with me. Oh, I made it work. Along the top at these intentions, and we see that by these three educational characteristics, there's no difference in the women's intentions to ever become parents in their 20s. But there is a difference by each of the three educational characteristics. So even though they all intend to become parents, in terms of their actual parenthood in their 20s, we see that those who do not have student loan debt, who left the university sooner than 4 years, and who do not have a bachelor's degree are more likely to be parents by their 20s. Okay. So now we're going to expand it through the 30s, the early 30s and late 30s, to look at how intentions change, and then to see if we can find anybody or any indication of catching up from these educational characteristics over time. Ta-da. And so if you will, look with me again at the intentions along the top. There's still, even though the entire population of women shows some reduction in intention, there's no difference in their intention based on these educational characteristics in wanting to become a parent or not. So then we see that with debt, there is evidence of catching up. Even though those in their 20s, in their late 20s, those who did not have debt were more likely to already become parents. When we look at this model, again, with all of these educational characteristics functioning together, there is evidence of catching up because those who do not have debt are no more or less likely statistically over the course of their 30s. That is not the case for those who leave college early and those who do not have a bachelor's degree. Those remain different over time. So we see that any delay relating to debt is operating through time in college and the bachelor's degree. So now we're going to do the same analysis, but instead of looking at transition to parenthood, we will look at cumulative fertility. So this is what we find, and as you know, I want you to look with me at the top on intentions, and we see no difference in intentions for debt or years in college, but throughout the, by the time we get to the late 30s, there is a difference in intended number of children that American women with bachelor's degree intend to have compared to those without. We also see the debt catching up effect continues with cumulative numbers of children, and we see a catching up effect with years in college. So that by the late 30s, those who left college at the normative 4-year timeline or longer are back associated with a similar cumulative number of children, and there remains a difference for those who completed their bachelor's degree. So, what did we find? American women with student loan debt are delaying their fertility, but they're catching up. So the student loan debt effect, we were looking for catching up effects, and we found them. So that was one finding. But we also have a little more complicated connection to timing here. We see a delay, but then a catching up with cumulative fertility for women who take 4 or more years in a university setting, but not with the transition to parenthood, which suggests that the women who do transition to parenthood are having more children under the circumstance to make that function on a greater scale. And then American women who have an undergraduate degree are not catching up with their fertility intentions or to those American women who do not. And so that suggests that the educational characteristics are impacting women and their intentions by their late 30s. And so I keep talking about women because we do see some evidence of delay for men in their late 20s, but by the time of the early 30s, there's no difference. There's no difference in intention to parenthood, in transition to parenthood, in intention of cumulative fertility, in total cumulative in total cumulative fertility, nothing throughout the early or late 30s for men. So these educational characteristics and their long-run effects impact women in the United States in a different way than they're impacting men, which means we need to talk about gender as we look forward to this, as we look at delayed and declining fertility in the United States and how higher education has evolved. That's really important to understand in the gender roles that are impacted here. There's an opportunity cost for women that is pushing these gender trade-offs, and it's exacerbated both as more women than men are engaging in higher education in the United States, and as women face a more limited biological reproductive life course. So that is worth keeping in mind also, how all those come together. But we do have evidence of catching up that we are happy to share. So this is not a story about falling fertility intentions in the United States, although we might need to look into the women in their late 30s with bachelor's degrees. But instead, we're just seeing the impact of education on women especially, and the delays are worth understanding, but as even into the late 30s, American women's fertility intentions are still high. So that if we are able to do something about these barriers, especially related to education, then perhaps we could allow people to have the children that they intend. Whoops. Thank you.